A long legislative session brought some key victories for Oregon Governor Kate Brown, but also a few big disappointments. Lawmakers passed a large transportation package, but corporate tax reform stalled out this session and will likely have to wait until 2019. Tonight, we sit down with Governor Brown at her Capitol office to discuss the legislative session and her priorities for Oregon moving forward. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter at the Oregon State Capitol. Lawmakers adjourned on Friday after spending 6 months debating and voting on thousands of bills. Some of them are relatively trivial, like the resolution updating our state bird. Others are described as historic, like the $5 billion investment in our roads and highways. We came here to Salem to talk to Oregon Governor Kate Brown to talk about this legislative session, the successes and also what disappointed her. We started off talking about the historic transportation package. Governor, welcome to Straight Talk. Thank you for having us here in your office at the state capitol.
Welcome to the state capitol, and I'm delighted to be back on again.
The legislature just wrapped up after 6 long months, and they did so really with a flourish, doing something a lot of people didn't think they were going to get done this session, is pass this massive transportation bill, $5.3 billion. How big of a deal is that? What does it mean for the state?
Well, I'm very pleased. We had Republicans, Democrats working together. We started work on this transportation package over 2 years ago. We put together a visioning panel, toured the state, listened to Oregonians, listened to the business community, have put together this package that invests in our roads and bridges, invests in public transit. It is a significant package. It is probably the most comprehensive transportation package we have ever put together, and I'm really proud of the work the legislature did to make it happen.
What grade would you give lawmakers? How do you feel about this session?
I feel really good about this session. I would give the legislature an A. And the reason why I say that is because legislators from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, were willing to come together around key priorities. Let me give you an example. I came into session saying I wanted to make sure that all of our children in Oregon have access to health care coverage. Just in the last couple of days, we've passed legislation ensuring that every single child in this state will have health care coverage. That's a huge success.
You also balanced the budget in the beginning. It looked like it was going to be tough, $1.8 billion deficit. Somehow you were able to bring that together, and it didn't seem like that big of a deal. You even could expand some budget. So how did you do that?
Well, it certainly was a challenge, the budget challenge we were facing. When I developed my budget, which is due in December 1st of the prior year, we were facing a $1.8 billion deficit. Over the session, the revenue forecast came in that brought us more money, so that reduced the deficit. But I put folks together in a room to come together around paying for the Oregon Health Plan, and that was a huge portion of the budget, was paying for the Oregon Health Plan. We had Republicans, we had Democrats, we had the CCOs, the Coordinated Care Organizations, the hospitals, and the insurers all come together around a package that will ensure that 1 million Oregonians will have access to health care over the next 2 years.
I want to ask you about that provider tax you're talking about, right? The hospital tax that'll bring in $550 million and ensure that hundreds of thousands of Oregonians still get health care and Medicaid. But some Republicans aren't happy about it. They filed paperwork to refer this to the voters. They say it raises taxes by letting the insurance companies pass on the cost to consumers. They say that the money isn't guaranteed to go to Medicaid and it will raise health care costs. Could this hospital tax hurt consumers?
Well, here's what we do know, and that is without the Oregon Health Plan, people go to emergency rooms and get health care. It's very expensive for people to get it in their emergency rooms. It's much more effective, and frankly, it's more cost effective for folks to have health care coverage up front, preventative care. So we end up paying, as Oregonians, we end up paying when people go to emergency rooms. I say it's much better for Oregonians to have the patient-centered, comprehensive care through the Oregon Health Plan. And let me share why it's so important. During the session, I had the opportunity to meet a young family. Brandy is the mother's name. They live over on the Oregon coast. They have 3 children. The oldest child is struggling with some mental health issues, but the youngest child is struggling with cystic fibrosis. And the medications alone for that particular child cost this family over $55,000 a year. So without access to the Oregon Health Plan, this family would not be able to make ends meet. So this is why it's so critical that we provide health care coverage to 1 million Oregonians across the state.
It could end up on the ballot. Republicans want it in November of 18. Democrats would like to move that up to January. What impact could that have on the budget? Because that $550 million was used to balance the budget.
So what's changed over time in the several years that I've been in public service is that the legislature used to meet every other year in odd numbered years. Now the legislature's meeting every year. And so we think it's really important to have that, should those folks get the signatures they need to get it on the ballot. We need to know that before the end of the biennium. So that's why we think it's important, I think it's important, to have that election earlier in the budget cycle so we can figure out how we close the gap and not end up cutting Oregonians off the Oregon Health Plan or cutting services to struggling families.
So we could see that in January. You gave legislators an A for this session, but there are others that would criticize that. They say that this was a good economic year, it was a boom year. And some of the short-term solutions that were passed by the legislatures getting some criticism. House Minority Leader Republican Mike McLean said Democrats were unwilling to undertake the major spending reforms needed to improve the state's long-term finance. He called it a session of lost opportunities. And State Senator Democrat Mark Hass has said there's 2 big things facing the state, and that is tax code and reform there, and the unfunded liabilities of PERS. And legislators didn't successfully tackle either one of those. That sounds like kind of a big fail.
So let me sort of tackle those 2 separately. We came into the legislative session, as you mentioned, with a $1.8 billion deficit. Because of revenue increases, we've reduced that deficit to $1.4 billion. A huge chunk of that was taken up by our ability to come together around a provider tax to pay for the Oregon Health Plan. We also did some very important things. We tightened our belts in state government. I signed a couple of executive orders putting in place a hiring freeze, making sure we eliminated essential travel, making sure that we kept vacancies open, that saved over $80 million. That's significant. And the legislature just passed a bill that was put together by Republicans and Democrats to further increase cost savings in the neighborhood of several $100 million. So that is significant. When you come into a session with a significant shortfall, the time and energy I spent, frankly, was in dealing with that short-term budget deficit. And that's exactly what we did this session. We balanced our budget, we provided health care for 1 million Oregonians, and we passed a transportation package that's significant. In terms of the issues raised around our structural deficit and around PERS reform, I'll tackle those one at a time. Structural deficit, absolutely, we must tackle it. The cost containment measure that passed will reduce the cost growth in state government. That's important. That's part of the solution. The other piece is working with the business community, working with labor, coming together around a proposal that will help close that deficit. I will continue those conversations, but what we were able to achieve this session is engagement. Engagement from the business community, engagement from the labor community, engagement amongst legislators about how we solve that problem. That's huge. This has been a long-standing problem for Oregon over 30 years. Governors and legislatures have wrestled with this for many decades now. I am confident that moving forward, we can tackle it together. The third piece I'll just mention is regarding PERS. I see this as a 3-legged stool. sort of 3 issues that we've worked in my office to tackle PERS. Number 1, the unfunded actuarial liability. This is roughly a $20 billion debt that we owe to retirees. The Supreme Court said we have to keep our promises to Oregon retirees, and I agree with that. I've put together a task force that will take a look at creative, innovative ways that we can reduce that deficit. The goal is to get us to 90% funded and reduce employer
So those are kind of
rates.
short-term things,
No,
right?
this is long-term in terms of it will help us solve the long-term structural deficit. It's short-term in I'm asking people to come to the table quickly and come up with solutions by the beginning of November.
Let me just jump in here a little bit
Sure.
and just to talk about how serious the PERS situation might be. The state facing $22 billion in unfunded liabilities, the cost growing at the fastest rate in state history. Republican State Senator Tim Knopp of Bend said if the legislature doesn't act, there's going to be a catastrophic failure of local governments in the next recession, especially if it's a bad recession. And then again, State Senator Mark Hass, a Democrat who led the effort on the corporate tax fight for businesses. If we pretend this is not an issue, it will eventually wreck our schools, swallow our state, just like it's doing in Illinois, where they have a pension crisis. I've heard some businesses talk about the possibility the state could go bankrupt. You know, it sounds dire. Have you considered a possibility of a special session?
Well, first of all, we're just concluding this session, so I don't like to cost taxpayer dollars by coming into a special session unless I have a product that I have solid support from both sides of the aisle and both houses on. So I mentioned the UAL task force. I think that is significant because the goal of that task force is to ensure that the unfunded liabilities will be reduced to roughly $15 billion, and that would leave us at 90% stabilization, which is really key because that will enable folks to reduce employer rates. The second piece is I asked for in my budget, and the legislature delivered, more investors at the state Treasury Department. Why is this important? Because these folks do a really good job getting a great rate of return on our PERS investments. And in fact, the more we have, the better I think results we're going to see. The third piece is the cost sharing. And there was a proposal on the table late in session. I'm supportive of that proposal. I anticipate that you will see, I will lead further conversations to make sure that we get to resolution around that particular issue as well.
I want to just touch on your leadership. There's been some criticism. The mayor of Happy Valley, Lori Chavez Dreamer, is a potential GOP candidate for governor. And she said she spent a lot of time here in Salem, and she wrote an op-ed piece asking where you were. And I'll read you what she said. Where has our governor been? The real issue seems to be that she's too focused on her 2018 campaign efforts and does not see the issues in our state as her first priority. A strong governor should be someone that is available to meet with legislators regardless of party. Kate Brown should be seen at the Capitol. It's essential our governor is available for the public during this session. Do you think you spent enough time here at the legislature during the session?
I spent significant time here, and I spent significant time meeting with Oregonians and communities around the state. That's how I developed my priorities around investing in an excellent system of education for every student in every school district, making sure that we have good paying jobs in every community across the state, and making sure that every Oregonian has access to health care. I met with every legislator this legislative session. I've been in this building now for over 20 years. I was very pleased to meet with a number of legislators multiple times. I brought legislators together around the transportation package, both Republicans and Democrats, from rural Oregon and from urban Oregon, to solve what I saw was a crisis in our transportation system. I put legislators together to tackle the deficit in the financing for health care, and we've got good results, enabling over 1 million Oregonians to have access to health care. Those are significant.
I think a lot of people assume that you're running for governor again, but have you definitely decided that you're going to run in 2018? Are you running for governor?
Right now I'm focused on governing, hearing from Oregonians what their priorities are, and making sure that we make Oregon the best state we can for everyone.
So we'll still wait for that official announcement. On another topic, last month the federal government concluded its investigation into influence peddling allegations involving former Governor Kitzhaber and his fiancée Sylvia Hayes, and investigators decided not to file criminal charges. Do you still think it was the right thing for him to do, to resign?
Look, I'll let Governor Kitzhaber decide that for himself. He was an extraordinary leader for Oregon. I appreciate his leadership, and I wish he and Sylvia Hayes the very best.
Just before he resigned, you issued a statement describing his actions at the time as bizarre and unprecedented. Any regrets about any role you might have played in his resignation?
Absolutely not.
When we come back, the challenges of being a Democratic governor in the Trump era. We'll discuss Governor Brown's efforts to fight the Trump administration in a number of areas, including immigration and climate change policy. Straight Talk from the Oregon State Capitol is back in 2 minutes.